Good evening and welcome. The time is 6:01. I'd like to call the August 12th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting to order. Debbie has noted attendance. Second order of business actually is the approval of the minutes from June 2020. And Jeffrey, I know that you had a note that you just emailed off.
Yep.
So if you want to put a motion on the table with your note.
I motion we amend the minutes as sent. The minutes as sent note that I was the council representative for after our June meeting. The original agenda has Matt as the council representative for the June meeting, and I certainly did not attend as council representative after our meeting. So with that amendment, I move we approve the minutes otherwise.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second to approve as amended. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Okay, we've got appearance and interested citizens for agenda item number 3, and it looks like I've got none. And the crickets are still quiet. So we'll go ahead and move on to the public hearing for the revisions to the Keizer Development Code to amend section 2.122 floodplain overlay zone and section 1.200 definitions to update the floodplain overlay zone for consistency with state requirements. We'll open the public hearing at 6:02. All right, commissioners, just hold on your questions. We'll see what Shane has to say, unless there's something that comes up that we really want to hear about straight away. And we'll turn it over to Mr. Witham and City Attorney Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Lawyer. Thank you, Planning Commission. So tonight we have 2 sections of code that we're looking to amend. The first one, I'll go with the easier of the 2, and that's the definitions section. Basically, the changes there are eliminating those definitions which are repeated in the floodplain overlay zone. Mr. Johnson and I had a brief discussion, so he may give some different advice tonight. I'm not sure where he landed on that. But essentially, with the new section of code for 2.122, the floodplain overlay zone, there's a whole slew of definitions built into that, and which our old code, our existing chapter, also had those definitions that for the most part were repeated in the body of the development code, but not wholly, which I thought was odd. I think there was like 6 of the definitions or 4 of the definitions missing for some reason. So for consistency, it was something that we kind of identified late in the game, realizing, oh, there's all these definitions, and because there's little tweaks to the words and different titles that mean the same thing but line up with the state law, you know, probably the best part is let's just keep it in the floodplain overlay zone so it's all kind of one place for staff. So that's what's proposed in the definitions section. There's no actual substance that's being changed there. It's just the location of those definitions. But obviously the bigger ticket item, which I apologize for the length of the packet, but after staff began to attempt to make all of the little changes to our different sections based on our community assistance visit back in March, it was pretty apparent fairly early that we needed to go ahead and just kind of scratch it and start over. Basically, you know, I shared at the June meeting that we'd be talking about this, and the community assistance visit is essentially a floodplain audit that happens to cities that participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. They're supposed to happen pretty frequently, but I can say the last one we had was when we were in a different building, so it's been a while. And so we were visited in March, right before COVID kind of shut down the world. And so there'd been some emails back and forth, and then all of a sudden, oh, and by the way, this needs to get changed sooner than later. And so I felt like we were being proactive, kind of trying to address their concerns, but essentially they identified most of our sections that they were basically adequate and in the spirit of the NFIP program, but they lacked verbatim language that the state wants to see there. So I provided you both our existing code that we are proposing to just simply get rid of and replace with the new section of code. As I said, the general standards I'm not proposing to change. Right now, we require a foot above base flood elevation for new homes. We're maintaining that standard. We're not, there's some recommendations in other communities where they're going 3 feet above and, a lot more for floodplain protections. But in Keizer, frankly, while we do have quite a few properties that are within the floodplain area and have flood insurance, we also have a lot of flood protection measures in place, like our river wall, which has reduced flood insurance rates for like all of West Keizer. We've had engineering studies done and letters of map amendment obtained through FEMA for pretty much all of McNair Estates, and a lot of the other areas that are close to waterways. There are a couple things. I did receive a couple of phone calls from commissioners, and I appreciated that. For those of you that reached out and asked me questions, I attempted to answer them to the best of my ability. But the one thing that was asked, and it was really a valid point, was, hey, we're just wanting to make sure that with this, taking these standards out and bringing these new standards in, that we're not losing anything that's Keizer specific. And I assured this commissioner, I was like, no, I've got it all. I got it all in there. But actually, I double checked, and there are 2 elements that the language as proposed that I would want with any motion being made or decision. If we move this forward as it is, I would want us to add 2 elements back in. And that's specifically in our existing floodplain section, because it's a little easier to find there. So in 2.122, as it currently exists in section, it's a long section, 2.12206, which are called flood protection standards, and sub O, which is the Willamette River Wall, and that's on page 17 of the existing floodplain ordinance. That particular provision is clearly very, very Keizer specific and does not exist in the state model code. So I would definitely want to have us add that into the correlating section of the new code to address that Willamette River Wall element. So that'll be one issue. And then the other issue, which was frankly, I think, just a simple miscommunication on cutting and pasting and some communication amongst staff people. We also have, right before that letter is letter N, which talks about critical facilities. And since 2010, we've had a standard adopted for critical facilities, which is a much higher standard for flood protection and locating of things that are considered critical facilities. That's something that is optional language in the model code. And as we were pulling in the model code and putting it all in place, that somehow got missed. So that's the other element that I would recommend that we add back in there. It's not a substantive change to what our code has previously stated. It's just one that, frankly, it just got missed. So that also requires that we add the critical facilities definition to the front of that chapter as well. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay. So again, I mean, I guess we could walk through the whole 30 pages.
27.
Oh, 27, yeah, you're right. I rounded up. We could walk through all the pages, but I don't know I hope that's not necessary. Again, I think that at this point, that's the crux of what we're doing tonight. It really is a response to keep our community in the good graces of the state of Oregon and the FEMA program so that we can continue to be a upstanding NFIP community. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you all might have on all of it.
City Attorney Jones.
Thank you, Chair and members of the commission. On the definitions one, I'll try to keep this brief. I should have picked up on this last week because my assistant mentioned something about it, but I didn't really think about it until Shane, talked to me in the hall earlier today. The definitions section for the development code generally is a little bit of a mystery. I'm the only one around long enough to kind of figure out what that is. The short story is, you may see in the definitions section some definitions that have a bracket after them. And the first one I noticed, I think, was greenway, but it has greenway or sign, and what that means is that definition, but flood is the first one, base flood at level, and then it's in brackets, flood. And I think the same occurs a lot of times for signs. I think there's a few for greenways, et cetera. And what that means is that definition also appears in the section noted in the brackets. And I think this went back before even Nate was here, John Morgan was here, and I don't know if it was the sign code or the Greenway amendment, that there was a debate about where the definitions should be, and this is why we ended up with a compromise that, as I recall, I wanted all the definitions in one place at the beginning, and somebody wanted certain definitions for reader convenience at the beginning of the chapter in which they applied. So unless you folks have a real need to get into the weeds on how to do that, I was just going to try to work that out with Shane. If you have a real strict preference, let us know. But we haven't had a chance to kind of develop any kind of recommendation for you on the formatting problem.
Commissioner Grants?
I have a couple questions here. I'll try and be brief. Having gone through several cities' code, I will say that having all of the definitions in one spot is convenient. Yes, you do have to flip back and forth sometimes when you're in a specific code section. That's just my observation. Then can you provide an example of what a critical facility would include?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it'd be like a hospital or a school. Basically, the definition that exists
Bottom of page 8.
is,
It's on the bottom of page 8 of the current code in the definitions
Okay.
section.
Okay.
why does my page say page 2?
Definitions.
Mine is page 2. Oh, those definitions.
In the packet.
Yeah, you're right. So, I mean, it basically it reads, a facility for which even a slight chance of flooding might be too great. Critical facilities include, but are not limited to, schools, nursing homes, hospitals, police, fire and emergency response installations which produce, use, or store hazardous materials or hazardous waste.
Okay. Is that in the current definition?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't match this.
Sweet. Okay, thank you. Next question. All of this new language overall seems pretty innocuous compared to what the old code was. Does this really change the implementation of anything overall?
No.
That's what I thought.
I mean, so I will say this. I do think that the new language creates a little more clarity in the world we're living in. For example, there's terms which I think you're probably aware of because of being in an engineering firm. There are terms and requirements that developers and hoops they have to jump through based on state and federal regulations. Things like getting what's called a conditional letter of map amendment before they can do a development project. Our current language in our code has no reference to it, but because it's a federal reg, it doesn't mean they're not still subject to it. So I do think that this new language is more in line with today's practices that FEMA forces upon jurisdictions and building departments. And so I think that it does create a little bit more clarity for a developer as what's expected, as opposed to if they looked at our existing language and said, well, where does it exactly say that I have to do this? And it's just silent on it altogether. So that would be one example of something that this new language brings in some definitions and speaks to.
So I may have missed it, but the only place that I read in here that a CLOMA or LOMAR conditional letter of any amendment or revision is required as part of a floodplain development permit is when you're doing any work within the regulated floodway. Did I miss that?
I can't say that you necessarily missed it, no. Just a second. I guess, yeah, that's most likely where it's going to happen, but it also has to do in areas if there's no base flood elevation and if it's going to provide rise.
Okay.
Generally it comes into when somebody's filling in a floodplain, and then we have this whole other thing we've talked about a lot, which is the biological opinion and the ongoing lawsuit. So there's this other provision out there that our FEMA Region 10 rep has kind of given the city written notice that, hey, if we're doing filling in the floodplain, that's a no-no right now because of what they're saying, although everything's on hold, so it gets really wonky. But that the conditional letter of map amendment based on fill or whatever, if you go through that process, it gives FEMA the ability to comment and to condition appropriately, which then covers the exposure that the city would have of violating the Endangered Species Act for failure to consult with the National Marine Fisheries Group and things like that. So, does that help?
Yes, it does. I guess one additional question, is staff going to continue to follow those recommendations and basically require a CLOMA if they're filling more than 50 cubic yards within a floodplain?
Yes.
Even though it's not required, there's not a provision in the code that requires that?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
And actually that, Jeremy, it's a really good point, and it was something that I considered adding into the code, but I am fully expecting that we're going to have some updated code language. And if that is something that Planning Commission feels is appropriate, we can definitely tweak that language to add those quantities in there.
I would prefer to keep it out.
Okay, Commissioner Wheeler.
I'm good. What I had in mind has been covered.
Okay. Commissioner Keizer.
Thank you, Chair. A couple things. I wanted to make sure that the stick figure depictions remained in the code because, quite frankly, I find them incredibly helpful in the definitions. And also that some of them are not aligned. We need to make sure they get aligned correctly. And I agree. I find it very helpful if all the definitions in a code are all in one spot. Having had to work with Oregon revised statutes for a long time, it was very frustrating depending on which chapter you're in. The definition may be different. It's nice when everything is in one spot, even if I have to go look at it, but in the definition's the same.
Can't be that easy.
I was gonna say, I will say, like, as far as the definitions go, Shane doesn't, I'm not gonna fall on a sword over it in any way, shape, or form, and I do think the world has changed a bit since back in the, late 90s when this development code was originally adopted, and then has been subsequently amended. It used to be really common practice for specific sections of the code, like floodplain overlay zone and the sign code, that people would come in to grab that section of code because it has above and beyond different regulations. So they weren't dealing with the 500-page document, but frankly, in the world of digitization, most people are going to our website to find it anyway. So I don't think there's a big concern on, at least for my end, there's not a big concern on whether or not the definitions live here or they live in the main body of the code. At a time, I think there would have been a stronger staff opinion, but mine personally, I don't have a lot of concerns with that. So.
Any additional thoughts or questions on the language in front of us?
I have. I contacted Shane last week and I had gone through what I had downloaded the 84 and printed and I ran out of ink at home. So I knew Deb would have them here. Thank you. But the definitions, I'm coming from more the construction side of the house, like Shannon said. I don't want to get into the weeds. I would rather just go through what I had and then just email you with just some definitions. An example is there's a park over by the river, and on that park or on that property is a building. I don't know what that building is, if it's a pump station or if it's just a maintenance shack. I don't know what that is in terms of the nuts and bolts of the floodplain. I know we're outside of that, but those are kind of my that's my thinking right now. But the definitions, I'm okay with.
Okay. So as far as regulating within the floodplain, that's where those buildings, it doesn't really matter what they would be used for. You would still have flood protection standards that applied to them based on whether or not it's an accessory building or it's a home and things like that. So there's some flood proofing and flood protection standards that you can do for certain types of uses versus other uses that are kind of outlined in that, the actual standards section.
Okay. My mind wants to move forward with this and look at the growth boundary and what development's going to go into that, if any, of the floodplain like Claggett Creek and moving north. See what I'm saying? That's nuts and bolts, I know, but that's what my mind thinks.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's a little bit different conversation, but that is something that whenever land is looked at for potential for redevelopment or, and in fact, not too long ago when we went through our housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory, they essentially will remove lands that are within that 100-year floodplain and not count them towards inventories because of you have to go through pretty intense scrutiny to develop in those areas anyway. So essentially we look at those as really not developable lands, generally speaking. So.
Fair enough. I do have a question for Commissioner Grants. Where did the number 50 cubic yards come from?
That is probably a better question from Shane, because I don't really know. It has come up on several projects that I've been involved in where we've had a floodplain development permit, and Shane has requested that we keep that fill quantity below 50 cubic yard limit, probably at the recommendation of the FEMA rep to limit the city's liability.
Yeah, The history of it is, I think in 2016, we received a letter, myself, Sam Litke, and Nate. Well, just our department, that basically said that no fill could be allowed because of the lawsuit that was filed, and that FEMA's response to that lawsuit was, hey, give us a chance to go through our program. So there were jurisdictions like Marion County, I believe, that they went in and their response was to simply say no development within the floodplain right now. I don't know where they stand currently, but that was their initial knee-jerk reaction when all of that kind of went out. At the time, Nate was our community development director, and he said that seems kind of overreaching and a little crazy, and so we reached out to our FEMA 10, our region, we're in Region 10 of the FEMA program, and so we reached out to our rep and said, hey, what does this mean for us? And so that was essentially that 50 cubic yards was their magic number for an acceptable amount of minimal fill that would be not open us up personally for lawsuits or the city. So that's kind of where that came from. Again, I think the overall process, I mean, there's these ongoing statewide meetings that are looking at the implementation of the biological opinion and how that's going to happen and affect all the different communities around the state of Oregon. But that's yet to be determined as to what exactly the recommendation is. So, as I said, what's before you is what the current official model code from the state lists as the language that is recommended from the state.
So the only questions that came up on this were very minimal, and I think some of the concerns was, how does this impact development currently in the floodplain? Pretty much non-existent, right? But unless there's a significant redevelopment of the property, total loss, and then new build, that's when the new code would come into play, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. And this also could apply to additional lands added in the event that they change the floodplain throughout the city. Okay, that was it. There was just a couple questions that a couple folks asked.
That's a big question.
What's that?
That's a bigger. Yeah. I think theoretically, I mean, just as our current floodplain ordinance would apply if the maps changed, the standards would effectively change for that.
Okay. And you guys have got the maps and everything that show where effectively the properties are. Okay. So I promised I would ask those questions, and I felt like they were fairly innocuous questions, but I thought it was important. And regardless, even if this wasn't in place, you guys are still trying to comport with what the state's telling you in terms of the floodplain regulations via the DLCD and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Keizer.
I wasn't sure whether I was going to ask this question, but I think it's important, at least for maybe for those folks trying to understand some of this. And Shane, you and I had a chance to talk about the issue of conveyance and why there's different standards, height standards, 12 inches for stick-built foundation homes, right. 18 inches for modular mobile homes. Marion County requires 24 inches. Could you explain kind of the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I mean, from just a high level look, foundation built homes, you know, there's the construction methods are such a way that they're built to withstand a little more floodwater velocity, there's less buoyancy, all of those kind of issues. So the 1 foot above the elevation, which isn't the minimum standard, you could go with a lower number. Some communities do, but the 1 foot above minimum standard gives a better flood rate for folks when they do obtain the flood insurance, because they're still going to be in a flood zone, so they're going to carry flood insurance. It's just not going to be as expensive for them. And then coupled with new construction, you're going to have requirements for flow-through venting and foundation designs and waterproof connections and elevated utilities, things like that. With the manufactured home, generally speaking, I think there's always a higher level of scrutiny on those because of the fact that oftentimes, like in a manufactured home park, I mean, I don't know how much you guys follow, news, but it wasn't too long ago that there was some surprise flooding over in Eastern Oregon. I think it was Hermiston area. And there was, it took out a bunch of people's houses. And so that's where you have a little higher elevation standard and tie down requirements and construction standards to hopefully prevent that from happening. And then the other big element with floodplain, just from a floodplain management perspective, if you end up with a structure that gets knocked off a foundation or is uprooted from its tie downs and now it's floating in a waterway that has velocity and it's running into other structures, you're having not only the flood damage to the initial structure, but maybe other structures that would have been okay that are now being damaged by that structure that's broken loose. So that's kind of the concept of it. I'm definitely not a technical engineer or data person that would say, why is this number better than the other number? The 18 inches that we've adopted has been it's the same standard. I did not propose to up it. And I don't know, Mark, when you say Marion County requires that, I don't know if that's the building department or if that's the county as a whole. But I know that from the county planning department, both Marion County and the city of Salem are what are called CRS communities, which is the community rating system. And so if as a community you want to apply for CRS status, which actually in Keizer we've looked at a couple different times, but you have to adopt a higher level of standards to get that. And what it does is it creates an additional benefit for your insureds in your community. So it will lower rates even further. It generally carries with it a pretty heavy load for reporting, additional public outreach. I'm trying to think of some of the other things that you have to do. We have to adopt higher standards than minimum requirements. And so that may be part of why, I know there's some different standards, and actually Mr. Grenz might be able to speak to Salem standards because I know they do development all around, but I know there are some higher standards in different communities depending on what they've chosen as a local entity to adopt. And many times those are driven by CRS, requirements or CRS goals. So that would be it's kind of off the top of my head, but that would be my guess.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Watson, Commissioner Wilson, anything to add?
No, but that was very informative, so thank you for the education.
All right. Well, do we have any written testimony to include? All right.
I did not receive any, no.
Okay, well, unless there's anything else, no, we'll close the public hearing at 6:34 and open it up for discussion. No discussion.
I'll make a motion, then we can just, maybe that'll form a discussion.
Okay.
I move that we accept the staff report as amended.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the staff report and changes as amended.
I'll second that.
Second by Commissioner Whalen. Any discussion on the motion?
Thank you, very bad news.
Mr. City Attorney.
I assume that means the two items that Shane mentioned at the beginning?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I need Franklin.
I did. Is it too late to inquire about how Claggett Creek got credits and how we can move forward with those credits, or is that not a good question?
Are you referring to the CRS rating system?
Yes, and moving forward for the development in the floodplain.
I'm not sure I understand the question, Frank.
Claggett Creek was obviously built in the floodplain, and so they were given credits. Okay, I don't know how those credits.
Do you mean
the school?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. You didn't
Okay.
say school.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was thinking of the creek itself, and I was like, well, Frank, it wasn't built in the floodplain. It is the floodplain. So, okay. I'm sorry. So with Claggett Creek Middle School, what was the question for
I
it?
think are you confusing with the wetlands credits?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so that's different than the
All
floodplain.
right.
All right. Any additional discussion on the motion before us? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. All right, you thought that was gonna be just pulling teeth, all wrapped up around the axle on that. All right, new old business, anything?
Oh, well, in my best Nate impression, the story pole is being carved, the second one. I know he would make sure to want to tell you guys that. No, but actually the guy's been working on it, so if you haven't seen it, it's kind of cool.
Kind of cool, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's not complete yet, so, I mean, when it's done, it'll be super cool.
The artist is a McNary graduate.
Oh, really?
Nice.
I didn't know that.
Cool.
Yeah, and I've already located the butterfly, but I'm not telling.
I have it on the front of the paper. I know exactly where it is.
Okay, so for real, or additional business, that is real business, but just kind of a couple of updates. The cost of growth impacts on the transportation system grant we've been talking about forever. That project's continuing on. I just had a phone call with our consultant this week, and they are prepping a draft report. So I will have hopefully some information to share sooner than later. So that, again, that's kind of that study that's looking at, well, what if expansion happened? What would that do to our transportation system? What kind of improvements would be necessary and cost associated with those? So I'm looking forward to see what those results are. Hopefully that can give more solidified information for decision makers like yourself and the city council as we move forward into the kind of future planning for Keizer. We also received the intergovernmental agreement for our buildable lands inventory and housing needs analysis literally just today. So we have the draft document that will be now being reviewed by our city attorney's office. And when we enter into that agreement, that will give the ability for us to update our housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory to kind of incorporate those efficiency measures realized by the River Cherry Overlay District that was adopted last December, I think it was. So we're excited to see what the results on that are and what the consultant and the analysts say is realistic to expect for accommodating some of our needs. The overall goal with that project is to get to a place where we can actually adopt officially our housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory and amend our comprehensive plan accordingly. So that project, I don't know if I've told you all this or not, but because it is more of a technical refresh of work that we've already done with a broader community involvement, we're not looking to go back and recreate the wheel for the kind of the given parameters under which they were to do the study. It really is to look at, okay, these changes we made, how does this impact us? How does it change it? So we're not going to be doing a full-blown advisory committee that would be made up of staff and planning commissioners and counselors and citizens. Instead, we're going to be using the planning commission and the council, most likely in maybe a couple of joint work sessions to kind of vet that work that they're doing. So that will be, again, that's going to be forthcoming since we just got the IGA from the state literally today. And I will keep you guys posted on that, but I expect in our future we will be talking housing needs and buildable lands and all of that good stuff, which is super exciting, but really important. The other thing that, actually, maybe Councilor Freeman will talk about this, but your work from June was adopted last Monday's council meeting. So those extension requirements we talked about, those will be going into effect here next month. And then other than that, we are continuing to stay busy. And I don't know if y'all watched the Area D stuff, but the master plan amendment is moving forward for Area D as well. So exciting stuff. Other than that, that's pretty much all I got for tonight.
Commissioner?
Shane, when this new housing needs and buildable lands comes forward, we went through this last year, whenever it was, there was talk about getting data specific from Portland State, I believe, or UP.
Yes.
Is that still coming with, COVID and everything else? I know many things have been altered.
Yes, it is supposed to still be coming. I think that I'm still a little bit uncertain as to exactly how that's going to work, Gary, to be perfectly honest. But that is an element of the scoping of this project, is to update it based on the most recent and up-to-date population projections.
How are we looking for the need for a September meeting? Are we on track, or are we looking at?
I'm not planning on having a public hearing in September. I actually am, sorry, I didn't mention September. Right now, we're either going to be talking about some efficiency measures, and I would like, before I bring a formal text amendment, I would like to have a discussion about some of the impacts. If you remember, with our housing needs analysis that we went through, and it got through the process in June of 2019, I think, when it was all done. An additional document provided with that was some basically efficiency measures. And there was a big list of different items in that. And we kind of went through it at the time and said, yeah, these look good, these look good, these look good. Well, I would like to get some input from Planning Commission more than these look good, so that we can propose to actually bring some real deal black and white writing to you of how we might implement some of those. So that being said, I don't want to just throw something out there without having a little bit of a conversation about that first. And then the other piece is I was hoping that I would have already had my draft report for the cost of growth impact on the transportation system deal. So that was originally what I thought I was bringing you guys in September. But I think that's another victim of COVID. The timeline has had to get pushed a little bit, and so we've had to exercise our extension right with the consultant to get that project all completed. And I mean, I'm more than happy to stay in contact with you, Chair Lawyer, and we can have further discussions. And if it's something that the Planning Commission says, hey, no, let's not talk about that, we can do that too. But I felt like it was premature to just come at you with, hey, we're going to reduce lot size across the entire city, without having a little bit bigger conversation about it first, to get your feelings on some of the other efficiency measures identified and what kind of priorities you'd like to set for them.
Any thoughts from the commission on that?
That's a mouthful. I mean, that's, because I recall having Salem went from 5 to 4,000 square feet.
Well, specifically on the efficiency measures, if Shane's going to bring us the list of the efficiency measures that we looked at back in, what was it, December you said?
No, it was like June of 2019, I think, when we got done. So it was probably July or August after that. It was pretty close to there.
So if we wanted to look at those efficiency measures in September to kind of start sussing out the kinds of things that we're going to ask Shane to kind of focus on to really narrow down on some of those issues, do we want to spend the time in September to do that, so it starts to get Shane a plan of action sort of moving forward?
We have new counselors from when we accepted those. I think it's reasonable. We have new counselors from when we accepted those. I think it'd be reasonable to look at it again. We as a group tend to like being cautious, like reviewing our work before we move forward with a formal text amendment. I mean, I don't think any of us would want to have you do the work for a formal text amendment and then have you present it to us and go, actually just have a few, I mean, it's us. But let's talk shrinking lot size. Let's talk that.
Yeah, and we'll have
new commissioners too.
Yeah,
I think we kind of have to, I think we're going to have to take a little half step back and do some review.
Oh, when do we have new
Well, September, your terms don't expire. You still have one more meeting.
Yeah.
One more meeting.
Well, if it's September,
If it's September.
Yeah, if it's,
it very easily could not be September, so.
When, we have 2 positions opening up, right?
these two, yes.
So, okay.
Is it you? Yeah. No, it's Crystal.
do you say?
Yes, Crystal and Gary, yes.
I mean, I'm willing to leave.
Made you look.
Sorry, Mark.
No,
You can't.
darn.
Well, I think we should just hold a meeting to make sure that Commissioner Whalen gets a good goodbye and we make a little big fanfare of it, because he loves the attention.
I think the existing commissioners should have to like.
I may be
post
absent
a
from
new
that
one.
meeting.
What's that?
I may be absent from that meeting,
We can go to your house.
but Crystal would love to be honored.
There you go.
Socially distanced over here, sorry.
I think as a matter of making sure there's consistency, that as the commissioners go out, they should be commissioners emeritus for like 6 months as they bring the other new commissioners along.
And you want that to stay on even after your term expires?
Not much.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly.
I'm trying to bring up new ideas.
So you're volunteering to be the trainer in charge?
I think I pretty much said Commissioner Whalen.
Oh, right. I think, so you said take a step back and do the review is what you're saying, so you're thinking September's probably a good thing to do?
Well, when are we going to know who the new commissioners are?
We will have, they won't be sworn in until the October meeting, because the terms don't expire then, but we will know who they are. The volunteer coordinating committee meets on, not this Thursday, but next Thursday.
So we'll know before the September meeting.
Well, it's not,
I think what Mark's getting at is what the turnover is going to be.
Yeah. I mean,
So we'll know, but I'm not sure that changes anything.
well, it just from the standpoint of like Frank said, this is a mouthful. I mean, this is a lot of knowledge and work, and you're bringing 2 new people in and expecting them to be instant.
And the people that have applied are brand new. They're volunteers I've never heard before,
So-
except for one.
I mean, it's an education by fire, but I'm just thinking of the timing.
well, I think that the opportunity exists, though, if the volunteer coordinating committee puts some names forward, I can speak with Debbie about it and invite them to the September meeting so they can get sort of an introduction of it in September, and then encourage them to work with Shane and, in the coming weeks prior to their first official meeting in October. I would expect that, hopefully folks that want to come in are willing to kind of put a little bit of legwork in. I know that Commissioner Grants and Commissioner Hostler both came to a couple of our meetings before they actually got sworn in. So, that was the level of dedication they shown coming in. I don't know that would be the same case for new folks coming in, but I would certainly hope that between reaching out from either myself and Debbie and Shane, we could really encourage that. I'm sure Shane wouldn't mind spending an hour or so with a couple prospective commissioners just to kind of get them a little bit more up to speed, if that's on your plate, but I don't want to speak for your schedule. So, I can see
I
both
will
ways.
always prioritize my planning commissioners. Absolutely. I will always make them a priority because I value what you guys do for us. So yeah, I think that realistically, yes, we could definitely do that. Sorry, my clock never stops here, so I didn't even think about the terms rolling over. Obviously, these are kind of living documents that go with the city forever, and there's always going to be that learning curve for no folks. I think maybe the more relevant piece would be is, if we want to move it and wait until they're on board, we can do that. Like I said, there may be some other things to discuss or to give updates on that make it worthwhile to have our meeting anyway, because we do have some big projects that are kind of all, bubbling over, about to kind of pop out some work for us to actually look at. The other element I would say, just from the flip side argument, is we also have a couple of commissioners that have been with us for some time and were a part of adopting that study and have a familiarity. So I would say there would still be a value to get some input as far as looking at those efficiency measures and prioritization and hearing their voices on that issue prior to their departure.
That's a good point.
I mean, I think I'm open to either way, whatever the commission collectively thinks is the better approach.
Go ahead.
I move that we push that back another month to give these individuals coming in not such a sharp learning curve.
Well,
it's an awesome topic. I love it. You know, I look forward to getting into it.
Tell you what, I think I'll keep in contact with Shane, and then if it feels like there's going to be enough, I completely agree with what Shane said in terms of having the current commission there to talk about those efficiency measures. And if these folks are able to come in and actually get to hear that conversation and get some of that resident knowledge from, like Commissioner Whalen, who's been around for, 6-8 years on the commission, that's invaluable experience and knowledge you're not going to get, but for sitting here and listening to his opinion on those things. And so I'm a little more inclined to recommend we move forward with the September meeting just for that reason alone, to get that exposure. And then in October, we can really kind of drill down into some more of the specificity of some of those efficiency measures and kind of narrow the scope a little bit more. But hearing what I'm hearing from folks here, I think it's probably a little bit, it's probably more of a better use of our time to spend that little bit of time to talk that over in September. But
This doesn't sound like necessarily it's a one meeting
No.
topic either.
Yeah, I think it's, my vision would be to have that conversation where I can kind of lay out where we're at, what some of these things could look like and do look like in some other cities. I've kind of already started compiling some information on a few that I've earmarked as being, okay, I think there's some traction here in Keizer based on existing development patterns and what we've seen historically and what the community expectations have kind of gravitated to over the years. I just felt that, I literally had something drafted up and was ready to put in my DLC to notice, and I went, that might be just a little too big of a bite without having a conversation with you, kind of the policy setters. So I wanted to be respectful of that and also just kind of get a feel. So I do think one of the things I would want us to definitely focus on is that it doesn't have to be a one size fits all or a all or nothing approach. It may very well be something that's like, you know what, let's take this step and let's see how that works. And then maybe this step later, as opposed to, okay, we're going to do lot size, dimensions, cottage clusters, everything at once. That's probably a bit much. So, I think it could be a one meeting and we come back with some text amendments. It could be a couple meetings to have a bigger conversation and try to get maybe more than 0 people here to hear some opinions too.
So I imagine since that was adopted, you've seen some of these things and probably have a pick list of some of these efficiency measures you're ready to get out in front of, right?
Yeah. I'm having a subdivision hearing next Wednesday night on one that's actually within the RCOD, which is implementing some of those new standards. And I got a slew of neighborhood comments. So, that's kind of the reality happens when the rubber meets the road and things actually start getting built, is really when you find out what people feel about it and if it works or if it doesn't work.
So quick question for the city attorney. Commissioner Hostler said I moved to cancel the meeting and I kind of cut him off.
I wasn't going to say anything because there wasn't a second.
Okay.
So, if the commissioner wants to pursue that motion, I think the chair had an alternative if that's still acceptable, and if not, you can pursue your motion. And I think the chair's alternative was to see what kind of information we could get out and have at least a partial meeting in September. And following up with regard to one meeting or two, there'll definitely be at least 2 meetings, if you will, because Shane's proposal was to have an informal discussion, not a hearing, because we haven't noticed a hearing.
Right.
So the soonest we could have a hearing is October anyway. Because of DLCD notice. Is that what you had in mind?
We couldn't have a text amendment, yeah.
Right.
I can't bring a text amendment because now we're outside that
We're outside
35-day
that notice
window.
period. So you're going to be looking at, when I say you, I mean the planning commission as a whole will be looking at it at least twice, assuming you meet in September. And so if I characterize your proposal correctly.
I didn't
terms of-
necessarily intend for it to be a proposal. I mean,
Okay.
if we want to let the motion just die, can we do that? Unless Commissioner Hosser really wants to move forward with the motion.
The thing I wanted is I don't want, this is a very deep, meaningful conversation for many people, and I'd like to see, more than 0 people here. And so,
I think if I could, I wouldn't anticipate a lot of people here if you do this in September, because it won't be a public hearing.
Right. It's just-
And so, but there would be more outreach and a chance for getting more people here at the first public hearing, which at the earliest would be October. So if that's your concern, I think that just expressing that concern, that we make sure that it's advertised correctly. I think like Shane said, a lot of this has already gone through. So I mean, I don't think we're anticipating a huge public outreach at this time, like we did the first go around. So
I guess I'll just ask if there's a second on Commissioner Hosler's motion. Okay, hearing none, motion dies for lack of a second. So we'll just stay the course. We'll chat. And I think for now, we'll just hold the September meeting as an informational, kind of looking at some of these efficiency measures and start to come up with a plan to kick this off in October.
That'd be great.
All right. Any additional new old business? Okay. Staff report.
I think that pretty much was the same as new and old business.
Well, it got split into two.
I know.
Normally
I
it's
don't know.
one
I don't know what
agenda item.
happened, man. I don't know. I asked Debbie before. I was like, "Is this like the same thing?" So I just started talking, and then you guys know how it is. I just kept talking.
I just thought you were trying to put your own color on the paper there. So.
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, fair enough. Councilor Freeman, what's new with the City Council?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just want to say thank you for having the meeting next month. I think it's critical to keep moving things along, even though I'm a fan of not having a lot of meetings, but this is a planned meeting, and so I just appreciate that. What is happening? So tomorrow morning at 7:30 is the Marion County Commissioner Breakfast. We meet once a month, and we're at Sherry's. And so it's just a great time for the 3 counselors that attend and the county commissioners, and just to see what's happening between the county and the city. So it's probably one of my favorite things to do each month. We have our next meeting on Monday, the 17th. And then our next regular meeting will be Tuesday, September 8th, because the 7th is Labor Day weekend, so we'll be meeting on a Tuesday. And then September 14th is our council work session, which is the annual parks tour. And then we meet again September 21st in regular session. Shane reported we passed everything at our last meeting, so moving along. And we also will be putting our charter information on the ballot. So thank you to Commissioner Whalen, was on the Charter Review Committee, and lots of really good conversation through that whole process. The committee did a fabulous job, and I know we approved the information to go in the voters pamphlet. So that's probably our biggest thing that we'll be working on. Councilor Smith and Councilor Herrera are in charge of our social media to get the word out to people. So I'll look for any of those posts, and please share them if you're a Facebook fan. I am not, so I always rely on everyone else to do that. But really, that's exciting news. And again, the committee's done a great amount of work on that. So thank you.
All right, so last thing, Commissioner Whalen, are you available on August 17th for the council report? Okay, I'll see you there for the parks. All right, well, Commissioners, thanks for delaying a month to give Shane the opportunity to get the floodplain information in front of us. Nice little break. Unless there's any, by the ways, witty statements, remarks. Seeing none, we'll call the Planning Commission meeting adjourned at 7 p.m.